Morning, guys and girls. We will get started in 2 minutes. If you can, please just start making a T-chart in your notebook. I want you to separate the difference between agricultural and an industrial economy. We will be doing this as a setup for the lessons that you're going to do next week. All right, and then we'll get into the Seneca Falls Convention. All right, so get set up with this. We'll start in now 90 seconds. Don't worry about the focus question, Anicia, because this is just a setup lesson for next week. So just, I would say, don't write a focus question, just write down this, and then we'll set up the focus question after this. Yes, you should be copying down both, guys. I'm still waiting for people here because we only got 42, so I know more people are coming. Yep, no worries, no worries. Okay, looks like we're good now to start. So let's look at the, so I consider this a setup lesson for the next part of Unit 2. Now, a big part of Unit 2 is the rise of industry in our country, but I don't really teach this until Unit 4. And I'll give a couple of reasons why. Number one, as a country, we have the start of industry kind of growing, but it's not a huge topic until the late 1800s. So what I like to do is I like to just get a setup lesson with it. And then what you'll notice is knowing the differences of economies between the North and the South is really important for the setup for the Civil War. And as we know, the Civil War is the next part, which is starting on Monday for us. So ultimately, we're going to do this little setup lesson, just about 10 minutes, all right, to get our feet kind of wet for next time on Monday. And then we'll get into the start of the women's rights movement, which is Seneca Falls Convention, which is a rather easy 11th grade topic. We're not going to spend too much time on it because it's just the start of the women's rights movement too. So these are two topics that you would see come up in Unit 2. I kind of do them both towards the end because they're just the start of what you need to know. All right, so you just got to kind of trust my process with this a little bit. We don't need to fully go into this just yet. Let's just know the basics of it. So let's first go into what is the difference between an agricultural and an industrial economy, because our country at the time is what's known as a mixed capitalist economy. All right, now I'm throwing that word capitalist back at you again, which, maybe some of you forgot. We don't really need to know the word capitalist at this point. We just need to know we have a mixed economy. What that means is our country is going to make money and going to make our products two types of way. One way is through agriculture and farming. The other way is through industry. Now, some economies around the world, some countries around the world only have agriculture, some only have farming, okay, at this time. We are a mixed economy, and depending where you go, okay, the more prevalent one will be. So if you went to the South is going to be based more on an agricultural economy at the time. Same thing with the West. All right, now that doesn't mean they don't have factories. They just don't have as many. All right, they're more of our focus in making money is through the agriculture, and the way they make money is through farming in the South. All right. Does capitalists focus on the economy, or do I have to mix? Yes. So capitalism is our type of economy. So the way we, structure the way people spend money, the way they get jobs, the way they operate is all through capitalism. But we'll talk about the differences of that a little bit later on. We just want to focus on the agricultural and industry part just for now. So you're going to see they're very similar, okay? But, the means they try and make money for our country is just a tad different. So agricultural economies, farming and crops lead to economic gain. So they're going to take their time. They're going to grow the crops. They're going to tend to the animals. This is usually done in the southern and Great Plains part of the United States. So another word for Great Plains at this point is the West, because we haven't really settled the Great Plains just yet. We're just kind of moving out there, as we've seen through Manifest Destiny. All right, so the farming and crops leads to economic gain. All right, and also animals are a major part of creating resources. The biggest one I can think of, as you're going to learn in this class, are the buffalo. This is more done in the West, but you also have your cows, your chickens, your usual farming animals to kind of help us in our economic gain. And these animals and these crops are going to create food for people to eat. All right, it's going to create clothing for us to wear. And they're going to create other products. The biggest one at the time that an agricultural economy would make is wool. All right. But by far the biggest, as we're about to learn, is going to be cotton. All right. But we'll learn that more when we get to the Civil War aspect of the types of economy. So what we'll learn is, why slaves were so needed is the slaves were the one that tended to the animals. The slaves were the one that tended to the crops. All right. And as you know, you don't have to pay the slaves. So this was an opportunity for the South to make a lot of money, and they did. So their economy early on was very successful because of the type of economy they had and the slaves that they had. Oh, I thought I was going to sneeze. I hate when that happens. Okay, I'm good. All right. So the next thing is industry. Now, again, very similar to the north and the south. There's parts of the north where you had farming, you had agriculture, but for the most part, we use industry to help out our economy. So the second you think industry, you should think machines, because this is what I do. Machines and factories. All right, because when you have these two things, these are the two things that help lead to a good industrial economy. If you have machines that are making the products, if you have factories that are where people are working, this could lead to a much better opportunity. So factories and machines are responsible for creating goods for economic gain. All right, this is usually done in the northern part of the United States. You know, New York would be more industrial, Chicago, Illinois, right? If you're looking in Michigan, Wisconsin at the time, they are much more industrial than they have agriculture. If you go to places like Boston, there's no farming really up there north. They don't have the weather for it. So they're going to be more focused in on industry. The technology and the machines take the raw materials, okay, which we're going to talk about. All right, we've talked about raw materials under mercantilism, but we'll get into this more a little bit later on. And now, like how Great Britain was doing, now the United States has the capability to manufacture the goods on our own, all right, in the factories. And what you're going to see is industry is going to provide the same thing. They're going to make food for people. I would say the biggest piece of food that is eaten at PS 89 are the bags of chips, whether it's the Takis or the Cheetos or whatever you guys like to eat. All right, those are going to be made more in factories than you're going to actually have made from farms. Okay, so depending on where you get certain foods, you know, some of it could be made in factories, some of it could be processed in factories. All right, some of it, okay, can be processed on farms as well. Okay, and we're going to produce clothing. Okay, you're going to see the textile industry. Okay, which is the clothing industry is massively huge in the North. A huge reason for the economic success before the Civil War for the North was through clothing. And you're going to see that with some inventions I'm about to show you that have helped out. And the other thing, ladies and gentlemen, though this is later on, you're going to see how important steel is. And you can't make steel without these factories and machines, and you only really made steel in the North. So two types of economies for our entire country, but you're going to see the division that starts to take place because many of the people in the South were farmers. Okay, many people in the North worked in factories, and there's this huge divide that started to develop, not just over the issue of slavery, but throughout the issue of jobs that people had. Okay, and we'll see how this is just one of many steps leading to our American Civil War. When people say the American Civil War was fought over slavery, they're partially correct, right, but there's a lot more to it. All right, I think you'll see that when we get into Civil War Monday, which, as you can tell, I'm very excited to get to because I think the first, you know, this part of American history is a little dull and boring. So I'm excited to get to a really, I think, interesting and fun topic, okay, despite it being really, really crazy. All right, with that being said, let's look at 4 inventions. Now, these aren't particularly things that come up on the Regents, but having knowledge of these 4 things will help you in your understanding of how the economies work, okay? And we'll see this a lot. All right, so you don't really need to write what's in white here. I'm just going to read it. There was much more industry and manufacturing in the northern states than the southern states, okay? That doesn't mean machines didn't help out some of the southern states, okay? And we're going to see that specifically with the first one, the cotton gin. Industrialization is a word we'll learn about more when we get to Unit 4, so I don't really need to go into that as much. All right, I'm just going to highlight these and underline them so you can see the 4 inventions a little bit clearer. Okay. So the 4 biggest inventions that led to a rise in the northern and southern economy are, first and foremost, the cotton gin. Okay, the cotton gin was a machine that was invented by Eli Whitney in 1793. It wasn't so big though until the early to mid 1800s. And the cotton gin is, even though this wasn't Eli Whitney's goal, it is the reason why slavery grew to be as big as it was in our country. There's many historians believe that if the cotton gin was never invented, slavery would have probably been abolished by the 1800, 1805 sort of thing. But this machine which the Southern slaves had to operate, was an extremely successful way of picking and producing and cleaning cotton out of the cotton crop. All right, and many of these slaves had to work on the plantations working with cotton. This indirectly leads to a rise in slavery, but it also directly leads to a rise in the Southern agricultural economy to be successful. Without the cotton gin, the South probably isn't as successful as it was, isn't as strong as it was. When you do your textbook Thursday reading next week, you're going to hear the term King Cotton. Okay, that's a term that comes up a lot, where basically cotton was king in the South and everything was made to try and make sure the cotton was processed, because it wasn't just the biggest crop and product created in the South. It was probably the biggest cotton was the biggest supplier by the South for the rest of the world. Okay, so cotton gin really helped out the South. The railroad and the steamboat, both very similar, so I'm going to kind of lump them together. They both helped out the North and the South. Though I would definitely say the North had more railroads and the South had more steamboats, but you don't really need to know that. It's transportation that moved people and supplies faster. I would just say, I think everyone understands how the trains and railroad works. I would just say the steamboat had this kind of cool capability. If you had a sailboat, if you had a raft, you only could flow with the way the current was moving. So my understanding is the Mississippi River, right, only flowed from north to south. So if you were on a sailboat or if you were on a regular boat, not a steamboat, you could only flow from north to south. That means after you were done, you had to literally like tow or walk back, okay, the boat up north again, okay, or you had to leave the boat there. The steamboats, though, could move in either direction. So it didn't move north to, it can move north to south, it can move west to east, it can move east to west, it doesn't matter. All right. My favorite thing, I've told you about this, there was a war in world history called the War of the Three Kings, I believe, and there's a battle that takes place where there's like a war that breaks out in France, and basically the people of England need to sail to France immediately, but they can't because the wind's blowing in the wrong direction. I think I've told you about this before. They didn't have the power of technology to go sail their boat in either direction. So you see both the railroad trains and the steamboats, they're going to have steam coming out of them. Not exactly great for the environment, but that's not something people are really worried about this time. And this, using coal, was able to power the steamboat and the railroad in all throughout the country. So this rise of industry is going to very much help out. And when you could transport things quicker, when you can transport people quicker or supplies, that's going to help out the economy. Because people are able to get products more quickly. Right, they're able to get what they need in a faster rate, and that's going to help out things. I mean, I buy so much crap from Amazon. My wife buys even more crap from Amazon because we know we're going to get it in 2 days. All right, we may not buy it if it's going to take us 3 or 4 weeks to get there. We can literally sit from home and buy anything we need. All right, so we don't have to, you know, because it's transported so quick, it helps out the economy, it helps out the people making money. Just pop in the chat really quick if you guys last year read Liddy in 7th grade. I know sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I actually have trouble following. No? Yes? Yeah, so that's what happens. Some students read Liddy, some students don't. So the students that read Liddy have a better understanding of the power loom and how it works. That was a huge invention specifically in the North. The power loom basically weaves textiles or clothing or fabric in a much, much faster way instead of people, I don't even know, knitting, crocheting, whatever it's called, which takes a long time. The power loom just did it in a much faster rate. And you would see if you read the book Liddy, okay, I don't think it's the most entertaining book of all time, but I have read parts of it, so I understand, you know, kind of the whole thing with it. It is going through the rise of industry in our country, but also is looking at it from the women's working perspective, which is extremely important because most of the people that worked in the textile industry were women, and this was huge in helping them gain some more rights, which we're about to look at, okay? So this machine helped the textile industry out much faster and was able to produce clothing. And probably clothing and fabric were the #1 thing that was made in the North, which helped out their economy out a lot. So our country as a whole is growing in two ways, through the agriculture, through the industry, but we're doing it separately. Right? These two types of economies are just going to help divide our country, and you're going to see how that leads to the Civil War. But from there, I digress. All right. So this is one of those where the first 20 minutes is one lesson, the second 20 minutes is another lesson. I could break it up and do one day, but I actually would rather give you all of tomorrow to study for your quiz on Monday. Okay, so again, reminder, it's a good time. You do have a quiz on Monday. I want to say, Liz Mel, you emailed me about when the quizzes code is going to be out for the practice test. It is currently out, so you can now do the practice quizzes as well. I made that yesterday on my day off because, I don't know, I had a boring day, so I made it yesterday. I'm not going to even act like I'm a great teacher. I just had nothing to do yesterday, so I did it. So yeah, you could do that. All right, so we're going to set up lesson 2 for today, which is a focus question. How did the women in the United States take their first steps towards equality? So again, you can set up that focus question. There's also a do now. If you want to, in the chat, post the do now answer. If you feel like you know it, please do. All right, the year is 1848. Listen to describe the types of people who could vote in this country by this point. No, not only white men. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Gentiana, correct. Only white men can. Okay, remember it was white men who own property. Now it's just white men thanks to Andrew Jackson. One step in the right direction. Yeah, over 21. Yeah, at the time, I think it is 21. Yep. They eventually moved that to 18. All right, so copy down this focus question. So my understanding is last year you guys did do the Seneca Falls Convention with Mr. Massey. I had a student 2 years ago, very big into women's rights. You know, was basically busting my chops for the first 2.5 months. Like, you're not talking about any of the women in American history. And like, I understand I haven't, you know, that's how the curriculum goes, sort of thing. And then we get to this first lesson, and the first lesson for the women's rights movement, the start of the women's rights movement, is only like 15 minutes long. So she started busting my chops about that too. I go, you just got to trust me. We're going to talk a lot about women and their role in helping out the start of our country later on, but you need to kind of understand the process of how we get there. All right, just realistically, many of the gains that were made early on in our country were made through white men simply because white men had all of the power back then. That's not the fault of any other marginalized groups. That's not the fault of women. They were literally, that's how the laws were back then. You know, women couldn't be in government. Women couldn't have a job that was like a lawyer or anything like that. So it's like, it's very tough. All right, but that's going to be the focus now for this. So how do the women in the United States take their first steps towards equality? By far, the biggest moment is going to be through the Seneca Falls Convention. So I'll mute myself. I will shut up for a second so you can copy, and then you guys will hear me out in a minute. Okay, so a couple of things. Seneca Falls Convention, generally anytime it comes up on the Regents, it's a very easy question. Okay, if you know it has to do with women, it pretty much is always an easy answer. With that being said, it is something that comes up a good amount because Seneca Falls is located in upstate New York. So again, this is like the Erie Canal. It's not maybe as big of a topic when you go to other states and take their U.S. history state tests. But for us, because it is in New York, it tends to get a little bit more of a push because this started, the women's rights movement kind of started in New York, okay, at least officially. So it's going to be a huge convention, okay? We've used the term convention before in this class. A constitutional convention is where you got very smart people dealing with writing the Constitution and as a meeting place where people can meet and discuss their ideas. The Seneca Falls Convention is going to be a convention where mostly women, though there were some men there, met in upstate New York to try and come up with some ways to help get more equality for women. So the first thing the women need to decide is what's important for them to get more equality in. Okay, because they're not going to try and get everything equal under law the first time they meet. So they're going to focus in and narrow down 3 things. All right, and the way they're going to do this is they're going to write something called the Declaration of Sentiments. Okay, and there's a reason they word it like this. In the chat, what does the Declaration of Sentiments almost kind of sound like? Okay, excellent. The DOI, okay, the Declaration of Independence, okay? So you're going to see when they write this, and you're going to read through some of it in a second, the way they wrote the Declaration of Sentiments is following the same path as the Declaration of Independence. So remember the Declaration of Independence. It starts off by talking about why they're writing this. Then it talks about the role of government. And then it starts listing all the grievances of King George. And then at the very end, it ends with basically we are independent from from Great Britain. You will see how it follows the same way here. It's going to start talking about why they're all meetings. They're talking about why women are important. Then it's going to list all the problems instead of King George. They're going to say all the problems that men and the United States have treated with women. And then it's going to, basically sign off by saying that women are going to fight for this now. So you're going to see how it breaks down. It's very similar structure. Very similar name. That was not done by accident. That was done on purpose. The Declaration of Independence was supposed to be that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. All men are created equal, right? Well, all men. All right. Now, we would argue in American history they meant all men and women, but you know what? It doesn't say that. So women are going to now try and make that clear. So here's the first thing they want, and this was the most important thing at the time. And actually, after this would start to change, though it takes a little bit. Number 1, women should be allowed to work in jobs that men do. Okay, if women wanted to work in the factory, if women wanted to be lawyers, if women wanted to be doctors, that is fine. That's what they are arguing. Women are just as smart as men to do any of the jobs that they want to do. This is absolutely ridiculous that they can only be teachers, nurses, servants. Okay, there's a lot more things women can do. As you would know, many of the women at the time worked at home. They really didn't work as much. But now women, listen, some women lived on their own. Some women didn't marry. They needed the opportunity to be able to work these jobs to support and make money for their family. Didn't that start discrimination of women in the workplace? Sure. I think that's been going on, since the start of American history. But yeah, obviously more jobs that women would work, the more discrimination that could take place. All right, so I would say, yeah, that's true. All right. Number 2, this was just a stupid thing. I don't even know why this was a thing, but basically women were not allowed to handle any trade of goods or sales. They weren't allowed to trade, and they weren't allowed to be businesswomen. All right, so they couldn't start their own business. They couldn't run their own shop. They had to basically allow men to do that. So even if a woman wanted to, they weren't allowed to. So they wanted to do that. That was the next thing. And you would notice the first 2 things. Okay, you would notice the first 2 things will start to happen for women after the Seneca Falls Convention at a much higher rate. Now, I'm not going to say after this convention, women were able to get any job they wanted. Okay, I'm not going to say that. Okay, they weren't really allowed to work in government at the time. Very rarely you would see them be the owner of a company. Okay, but it started to be steps in the right direction. And then, yes, or being able to vote did take a while, but at least the conversation started here. Black women got the right to vote the same time white women got the right to vote in 1919. The last thing is, and I just want to point to the term suffrage. That's a word that will come up a lot. Suffrage is basically the right to vote. So a suffragette or a suffragist is someone who is trying to get a group of people the right to vote. And they wanted suffrage for all women. Now, this was a huge push by the lady here on the right, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She would eventually pass this off to Susan B. Anthony, who's another very famous women leader. Unfortunately, both of these women would not be alive when the right to vote actually came. So this is still 70 years away almost. So this is just the start of the conversation. Many women are going to try and get that law passed or get that amendment passed, but that's going to take some time. All right, our country at this point only believes that white men should vote, but we are working away from that as time goes on. Okay? All right. So what we'll do for the last 9 minutes of class, all right, is just I want to quickly just look at the Declaration of Sentiments. So if you guys have looked at Lesson 10, which I'm going to share right now. Good reminder, tonight is the last textbook Thursday. We have a whopping 10 people who have already handed it in out of 53 or whatever. So that's that kind of stinks. So you guys make sure you get that done by the end of the night tonight. Okay? And then obviously your quiz Monday. All right, so just a reminder for that. Okay? So here is the Seneca Falls Declaration. If I put the Declaration of Independence, I'm going to do, I'm just going to prove it to you. Look at how both of them start off. All right, starts off when in the course of human events. So just look at how this all starts off here. It's not coincidence. This is how the Declaration of Independence starts, when in the course of human events. Then it goes into we hold these truths to be self-evident. And then you go to the lesson you're looking at now, when in the course of human events, okay, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay, it's all kind of the same thing. Okay, but you're going to see, you know, kind of the main changes, okay, as it goes on. And then look how it talks about, instead of King George III, they're referring to, where they say he has kept standing armies. Okay, so again, right? Look at how this breaks down here, right? He has refused to his assent to laws. They're not talking to men here. They're talking about King George III. Okay, he has refused to do this. He has refused to do that. He has forbidden this. All right, and then you go to the Declaration of Sentiments, and it starts going into he has compelled her to submit to laws. All right, he has made her married in the eyes of law, civilly dead. Right, so you see how the same process goes down. Okay, so you're going to go through this reading. There are 10 questions, a little bit of extra work. I do apologize, but this first period got off to a little bit of a late start because I think some people were coming in late. Also, I had about two teachers texting me, so I had to respond to that. So I apologize about that. So you guys are going to read through that. Anytime you see a question, you have question 1 here, question 2 written in my kind of budget type of handwriting here through a computer. I have bad handwriting in general. Thank God you guys don't actually see it. But this is me through the computer. So you have 10 questions here. Okay, you guys already know what to do at this point. No one leave, though. I need to take attendance, and I have 5 minutes to do it. So please just get to this work for the last few minutes of class. Any questions, pop them in the chat. All right, tomorrow will be a review day for your quiz. All right? Are we going to learn about one woman that had a big cause on this? I would definitely write down Elizabeth Cady Stanton's name. If she's someone that comes up on a multiple choice question, no. You will see some of her work though in DBQs. We're not specifically learning about that particular person. We really don't do that for really any major people. I'm talking even like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, like they're kind of mentioned over types of movements, but never through their actual individual things that they've done. The only groups we may do that with are presidents, but you really never have to know the full individual details of a person. But I would encourage you to, do your further research on particular people that we mentioned, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton.